Hi, and welcome back to part 3 of this video series all about the top-down, center-out method for fitting a pair of pants. In this video, I'm going to talk about the first step in the fitting process, and that is to collect some really critical information about the fit and the design of the pattern that you've chosen. When you're looking around for a pattern, choose one that is a quality, well-drafted pattern with multi-sizing, so one that has nested sizing throughout the range. Choosing a pattern with a straight waistband and either darts or pleats for the shaping elements in the front and back is also a good place to start. Now remember when I said in the previous video that the top-down, center-out approach is not based in concepts in pattern drafting. That's not where this method is coming from. Instead, top-down, center-out is more about understanding the relationship between the pattern or the fabric and your body. So things like, how is the fabric draping across the body? How much fabric is there? How much space is there between the fabric and the body? How much ease do we have, and where is that ease? All of these relationships, that's what we're assessing when we have our one-legged toile on later on in the fitting process. And in order to make decisions about whether to change those relationships and how to change them, we need to have some sort of reference point to aim for. And that reference is the intended fit of the pattern. So what the designer intended, that's the target that we are going to shoot for. And so in order to be able to shoot for that target, we need to understand what the fit is. And so we're going to be doing what I like to call a close reading of this pattern, all the materials from the designer, the photos, the size charts, any information in the instructions about fit. All of this is really going to be critical information to use as we're fitting. So I think it's tempting to skip over this step and just dive right into the waistband fitting, but this part is really critical. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a couple of examples of how I do a close reading of a pattern. To begin, I always start by looking at the measurements chart for the amount of ease that's been drafted into the hip. This is a straightforward calculation, it's easy to do, and it gives you a lot of information about the fit. What I'm showing you here is the hip circumference from the finished garment measurement for a pattern on the top, and then this is the hip circumference for the body measurements chart on the bottom. Now it's a good idea to measure your pattern pieces and make sure that these finished garment measurements are correct before you do this calculation. And I calculate the amount of ease for every single size in the range, not just my size. And I do this because the next step is to go and look at the product photos for this particular pattern for clues about the fit. Most of the time, the models in those product photos are a significantly different size than me. So it's important for me to know if the amount of ease is changing. They may have a different amount of ease in their garment compared to the amount of ease that's going to be in my garment at my size. It's okay that the amount of ease is changing. That is an aesthetic choice that the designer made to preserve a specific proportion or silhouette throughout the range, but it's good to keep in mind if it is changing and by how much. Now, hip ease is a great starting point for understanding the fit. The next thing I want to know is how much ease is designed into that crotch seam, how much vertical distance is intended to be between the crotch seam and the body, and then how much ease is in the thigh and in the leg. So I want to get the whole picture here throughout the entire garment. And depending on your pattern, you may be able to find some of this information in the sizing chart, or sometimes it's written in the pattern instructions. There can be a description of the fit, but most of the time I have to go and look at the photos. So here is a photo from the Merchant and Mills Eve trouser. This is a photo from the upper size range, just as an example of what I would look at if I were fitting. Now, what I'm looking for here is basically how the fabric is relating to the body. And in this particular pattern, in this size range, there is about 5.5 inches of ease at the hip. So I'm looking for what does that look like in fabric on a body. What I am seeing here is there are these gentle folds of fabric here that are going kind of across the abdomen and through the hip, and that's telling me that's what 5.5 inches of ease looks like in this fabric, in this pattern, on this body. And I can see it's also, so it's draping across the abdomen, and then as it gets toward the crotch seam, that fabric is hanging a little bit away from the body. So if I had to guess, maybe there's an inch or an inch and a half of vertical ease here between the crotch seam and the body. And if I'm fitting this pattern, then I might start there when I'm fitting my toile. Start with about an inch, inch and a half, see what that looks like on the toile, and if the toile is looking like what I'm seeing here. Let's look at the back of the pants next. So this is the same pattern. This is the Eve trouser, and this is from the lower size range. And I like this photo because it's telling you a lot about what the back of the crotch seam is doing. And I'm seeing these two folds here and here that go through that seam. And it's telling me that there is some extra length here in this crotch seam and that it's able to move with the body, and it's not super snug, it's a relaxed fit. Side note, there is the same amount of ease in this size, or what I think is this size, compared to what we just saw. So it's about 5 inches of ease at the lower end of the size range here. So these fitting decisions have been preserved over the range, and you can see that in the way the fabric is moving. The other important clue here is that as the model bends their leg, we can see the fabric is pulling at the back of the knee, and there are these vertical folds pointing up to the hip area. And that's telling me how much ease there is in this leg. And I will admit that past me may have been tempted to do some sort of flat seat adjustment or fisheye dart if I saw this kind of fabric draping in my toile. But these photos are really telling me that that's designed to be there. That is the intended fit from the designer. And I have to say that top down, center out really challenged me to think about, where did I get this idea that this was too much fabric if I see this in one of my final garments. Not all pants have to fit the same way, and that's why we do this close reading of each pattern that we're going to make. Let's look at another example. So this is Vogue 1729. It has a straight waistband and a slant pocket, and on paper it's another classic trouser similar to the pattern that we just saw, but the fit is actually quite different. So one thing is the pleat in the leg. We can see from this front-facing photo that the pleat creates these vertical folds of fabric that point up the leg. And what I'm looking for here is, where do these pleats end? Where do they blend into the rest of the fabric? And that happens fairly high up. It happens around mid-thigh. So that's telling me there's quite a bit of volume in that leg, quite a bit of ease all the way up, even to mid-thigh. So that's a clue that I'm going to use when I'm fitting this. I'm not going to try to overfit that leg and take out some of that ease, because then the pleat is going to change. Now the back is interesting on this particular pattern because we can see what the crotch seam is doing fairly clearly. And I haven't done the ease calculation for the hip for this pattern, but just from looking at this photo, I can tell that the fit through the hip and the crotch is fairly snug against the body. So unlike the previous pattern, if you look at the crotch seam here, we're even getting a kind of a peachy shape, a peachy fit at the curve of that crotch curve. And so that's another fitting clue. If I'm fitting these, then I would start with the assumption that that crotch seam is designed to be fairly close to the body, unlike the more relaxed fit we saw before. These are just two examples of how I do a close reading of a pattern. If you'd like a third example, I have a saved highlight on my Instagram account all about the Adams pants from Daughter Judy Patterns. I actually enjoy doing this kind of detective work, and it only takes a few minutes really to do the ease calculations and to really critically look at and read the product photos. I think it helps me to have a clear vision of what I'm aiming for as I head into the fitting process. In the next video, we will talk all about the waistband, and we will start fitting the waistband, so the fun begins. I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.